Now we're on Daf Nun Testament Beis, and we're trying to figure out whether there's a logical reason to equate Shtei Lechem that's brought on Chag HaShavuos with the Kivsei Atzeres to Minchas Omer that's brought on Pesach, and therefore to include Shtei Lechem in the requirement of Levona and Shemen. So that's what it says, Shtei Lechem Avilakush Shekain. Now we'll list all the similarities between Shtei Lechem and Minchas Omer. Tzibur, they're both an obligation on the Tzibur, Chova, and they're both obligatory. Now again, this is in contrast to Minchas Kohanim, which is not similar to Omer because it's not a carbon Tzibur, rather carbon Yochid, and not only that, there's no Chova, it's all voluntary. Tamya, which we said already before that there's a din that you could bring the carbon even if it became Tommy, and that's true for both Minchas Omer and Minchas Shtei Lechem, Di Achal. And what happens with the Shtei Lechem? It gets eaten by the Kohen. And that's true for the Shirayim of the Minchas Omer. It's eaten by the Kohen. In the case of Minchas Kohanim, it's Kulei Kolet. Pigula, right? We said that there's no Pigul in the case of Minchas Kohanim because there's no Matir. But in the case of Shtei Lechem, like Minchas Omer, it's the Kmitza that's Matir, the Shirayim. And in the case of Shtei Lechem, it's the Bezichin, the 2 spoons of frankincense that's Matir. And therefore it's subject to Pigul. B'Shabsa. And again, what exactly is the violation of Shabbos in the case of Shtei Lechem? I have a suspicion that we're talking about the Shnei Kvasim here. Let me just see if he points that out or not. Let's see what he says about Shabbos number 6. He says the Omer and the Shtei Lechem are communal offerings that have a set time, may be offered even on Shabbos. I don't know. He doesn't tell you what it means they're offered on Shabbos. Shtei Lechem is not offered. Shtei Lechem is eaten by the Kohen. But I think he means, but I don't know why he doesn't spell it out, the Kvasim. And the avodos of the Kvasim are going to be matir the Shtei Lechem, and those avodos will take place even on Shabbos for the sake of the Shtei Lechem, and they will override the Shabbos. Minchas Kohanim is a private mincha, would never override the Shabbos. Matir. Oh, this is beautiful. I love this. Matir. There's a tremendous similarity between the Minchas HaOmer and the Shtei Lechem. The Minchas HaOmer is to Gvulin, to be Matir Chadash, as the Shtei Lechem is to Migdash, to be Matir Chadash. So you can't bring a Mincha from the new Tvua until after you bring the Shtei Lechem. And finally, we get to Tnufa Ba'aretz Bizman Chadash. Right? So there's a din of Tnufa, and Ba'aretz. Why is Ba'aretz excluding the Minchas Kohanim? Let me just see if he fills us in on that. Number 9. The Yomer Shem for produce grown in Eretz Yisrael. That's mean. Other Menachos, other than the Omer and the Shtei Lechem, other Menachos can be brought from imported grain from out of Eretz Yisrael. Not so in the cases of Omer and Shtei Lechem. Which might have to do with the issue of whether Chodesh is mutter and chutz la'aretz. Okay, I don't know. Anyway, Bizman means they have a set time, whereas Minchas Kohanim doesn't have a set time. It's purely voluntary. Chodesh, and they both are matir Chodesh, the new grains, whether it means new grains for Achilas Adam in Gvulin, or whether it means the new grains for the Mizbeach, Achilas Mizbeach of Menachos. So the Gemara asks for Hani Nefishin. The striking similarity between Minchas HaOmer and the Shtei Lechem is so convincing, so overwhelming, that it would make sense that the Shtei Lechem should require Shemen and Levona. Why do you assume that no, we're going to include the Minchas Kohanim, but the answer is nefesh. Nistabra nefesh. Okay, we went over this 3 times already, so I'm not going to go over it again. And this leads us to the Mishnah here on Daf Nun Tesam and Beis. V'chayev al Hashemin b'fnei atzmo. Okay, so here we have to know that the Torah prohibits in 2 cases of menachos adding shemen or levona. So again, if we go back to the previous Mishnah that we started today, so the Mishnah tells us that there are 2 menachos that don't have neither shemen nor levona, and they are the minchas chote and the minchas knos, right? Aim to unim lo shemen lo levona, and the Torah prohibits you from putting shemen onto on any of these 2 menachos, and you get malchus for that, or adding levona on top of any of these 2 menachos. V'chayev al Hashem b'fnei atzmo, v'chayev al levona b'fnei atzmo. These are 2 separate prohibitions that are derived from psukim in the Torah, and you get malchus for each one of them. If you either add shemen on top of these 2 menachos, minchas chote, minchas kenos, or if you add levona on top of it. Nasan oleh shemen psola. In addition to the isa that you violated by pouring shemen onto these 2 menachos, you also invalidate these 2 karbanos. So it's both a psul and an iser. But in the case of levona, it's not. What's the word? Just give me a second. Unsalvable, if there's such a word. Anyway, meaning that you could still salvage your situation. Why? Because in the case of the oil, if you add the oil to the mincha, it seeps into it's balua into the fine flour. But in the case of levona is solid, and it won't be absorbed into the fine flour, and therefore Yilkatenu, all he has to do if he violated the Isser is just take off the levona, and then back to square one, the mincha is ksher. Nasan shemen al shireha. However, if let's say in the cases that we deal with, again, minchas chote and minchas knos, if let's say after the kmitzu is done, and it's mate the shirayim for achilas kohanim, he then puts shemen on the shirayim, or alternatively, nasan kli al gabi kli. We'll see what that's all about. In other words, he had oil, but it was inside a kli, and he put it on top of one of these 2 menachos. Lo psola. That doesn't invalidate the carbon. So if one placed a vessel containing oil or levona on top of a vessel that contained the minchas chote or the minchas knos, he does not thereby invalidate the mincha, because the invalidation occurs only when the oil was actually added to the flour of the mincha. Okay, now Toner Rabbana. We learned the brisa. Lo yasim oleh shemen. This is the violation of putting shemen on these 2 menachos. The some pasal, the brisa says that if he went and he did it, not only did he violate the lav, but he also invalidates the mincha. Yachal, I might think lo yitain oleh levona. The next part of the pasuk says you're not allowed to put levona on top of these menachos. Is therefore I might think then im nasan pasal, meaning it's irreversible, unsalvable. Talmud lomar ki chatos. In other words, even after he put the levona, the Torah adds ki chatos, it still retains the status of a chatos, meaning the carbon is still kosher and he doesn't passel it. And the reason for that, as we said before, is he'll contend because he could just take off the levona and go back to square one. Yochel af b'shemen. I might think that maybe in the case of shemen, maybe also we should say that since the Torah didn't invalidate the mincha as a result of the violation of levona, maybe we should say the same thing with regard to shem. Talmud lomar he, that the he is a miut, and that miut is going to say that in the case of shemen you passel the mincha, in the case of levona you don't. For fact, the gemara my rois lives up shemen l'akshem levona. Well, it doesn't make any sense. You got a miut and you have a ribui. How do you know which matching you should use? And the answer is posali b'shemen she efshel lokto machsheni b'levona she efshel lokto. It makes a lot more sense to say that once you pour on the shemen onto one of these two menachos and it gets absorbed in a way that it's irreversible because it's totally absorbed in the flour, that's when the Torah says it passels the karba. But in the case of levona, where it's just floating on the surface and you just remove it, then it's more logical to assume that the mincha retains its status. Again, it's not going to be kosher until you remove the levona. Boy, Rabba Bar Rabbi Yochanan, he asked the fine question, Nasan aleh levona shchuka mahu. Now he took the levona and he turns it into like a semi-liquid. Why? Shchuka means he crushed it. And by crushing it, now he won't be able to collect it from the flour because crushed levona is now irretractable, so to speak. Let's see if he gives a better word in English here. Oh, collect. He used the word collect. It's uncollectible, right? So now let's understand Rabbi Bar Huna's two studim that he vacillates. Mishum the efshalokta lo efshalokta. You can't collect the levona after it's shchuka because you won't be able to find it in this mixture. Oh, Dilma, perhaps this is kosher, meaning the mincha is kshera, even though it's shchuka. Why? Mishum the Dilma mishum de lo mivla v'hanami lo mivla. Meaning, the levona, even after shchuka, still retains its status as a solid. It's not a liquid. Shemen is a liquid. It's absorbed in the very fiber of the flour. So it's more than just a question of whether I can take it off, right? Or I can't take it off. In the case of shchuka, I can't take it off. I can't collect it. But it's a question of blia. Tashma, let's prove this. Because our Mishnah says levona, that if he added the levona to one of these two menachos, is yilketena, it seems that it has to be subject to likut, to lake, to collect it, skim it off the surface, what you can't do in the case of shchuka. It's irreversible. You don't know where it is in this mixture. And the Gemara says, no, that's no proof. Why dilma chada v'od ka'amar. Chada delo mivla, v'od yilketena. That the reason why, in the case of adding levona to these menachos, it's kosher, is because it's not mivla, it's not absorbed, and therefore, even in the case of shchuka, it's not absorbed, and the carbon remains kosher. The Mishnah says that that yilketena, which is impossible in the case of shchuka, that's the od ketani, meaning, like I'll give you an. I'm going to tell you that the real reason is because it's la mivla, but you know what? To make it easier for you to understand, I'm going to say lo yikutena. Toshma, let's bring another proof to be machriya the suffix of Rabbi Huna machshir ani belevona she'ef shalokta. The Raisa says that the reason why these two menachos are still ksheros is because it's efshar lilokta. So it would seem that the only time, according to the Brisa, that you can salvage and be machshir these two menachos is only because efshel lokta. But in the case of shchuka, you cannot be malake. No, again, hachanami, we're going to apply the same reasoning of chadaviot kama. My havilo, what's the final conclusion regarding this suffix of Rabbi Bar Huna? I'm going to prove it to you from a brisa. Minchas chote or minchas knos shenos and levona malaki is levona kshera. It's only after you do the likut that's when you reverse the status of the mincha to be a mincha kshera. But before you did the likut, it's not a mincha kshera, and that has tremendous implications as far as a machshava poselis. Therefore, if we before he was malaki to levona, so right now the levona is on top of the mincha, and chishiv ben chutzim ben chutzim komo possible, but v'yein kares. You cannot generate a chiyuv pigul with a chiyuv kares for eating pigul because it's already possible. And why is it possible? Because at this point He was not malaked. He didn't get a chance yet. The opportunity didn't arise for him to collect the levona and skim it off the top of the mincha. But if he had the machshava of chutzes manu hamafagelas, after he already took off the levona, and now he's already being machshir the shtei menachos back to the original status, is mechashiv alechus, is mechashiv aleha. There is a machshava poseles, whether it's chutzum komo, which is a machshava poseles, maybe keres, but chutzum manu is pigel v'chayovin le'kares. So what do we see from this brisa? It seems that up until the point that he removes the levona, it's not a kosher carbon. It's right now in its present state, it's possible. And therefore, in the case of shchuka, which cannot be removed under any circumstances, then the carbon is possible. So the Gemara says, "V'tehevi pa." Okay, now I'm trying to remember how I understood v'tehevi pach. Let's see if I remember. Oh, pach is just used here as a kind of a figurative or dramatic expression. Let it be like a, let's say oil spilled onto a mincha, right? Oh, just one second. So now remembering. We're introducing now the concept of dichui. So now, I'm sorry. So the Gemara now is going back to this brisa to try to figure out why the machshavas pigul registers. Why does it register after you remove the levona? Why not apply the principle of dichui? My pasal machshava. Why should pigul be generated? Dachuyu. Since he put the levona on top of one of these two menachos, and at that point it was dichui, it was rejected, it was possible, as we saw, that therefore there's no machshavas pigul fagelas. So then, even after he takes off the levona, it's already been nidcha, it's already been rejected, and therefore there could not be a machshava fagelas because there's no machshava fagelas on a carbon that's possible. Omer Abaye chatos kari rachmoni. Right. Logically, I would never have said it. I would have applied the principle of dichlut. But here, there's a special gzeres hakosiv, chatos, that even after you put the levona on, you can remove the levona and reinstitute the kashrus of the mincha, and that's called chatos. That's why it's called a chatos. Rav Omar, no. I have a sheet of Hanan the Mitzri, who came from Mitzrayim, and his sheet is that there's no such din as dichu. You don't say that since it was rejected once, then forever and ever it's rejected. And this is sugib in Sukkah that I think we once learned about where there are more berries on the hadas than leaves, and then you remove the berries. And do we apply the principle of dichu? So Hanana Misri is famous for saying, I don't apply the principle of dichui, and that's a sugya in Yuma, which would take us a half hour, but we'll try to do the best we can in the few minutes that we have. The Leslie do the Sadya. Where do we see the Hanana Misri says that there's no din of dichui? Afilu dam shabakos, mevi chavero shlo arog misdaviklo. So what happened here? You have the Shnei Seirim, the Sira Pnimi and the Sira Zozel of Yom Kippurim, and it's a package deal. You need both of them. Now, what happened? He did the shchita of the Sora Pnimi, right? The Sora Azazel just gets sent out to Azazel. So he did the shchita. Now he has the dam in the Kli Shores. After Kabbalah Saddam, that's called a mitzvah. Okay, now it falls on the floor, it spills on the floor. The dam is now on the floor. So once the dam is on the floor before Zrika, you didn't fulfill the last part of the avodah of Zrika. Therefore, the chatas hapnimis, otherwise known as the sar hapnimi, is possible. And now the issue is, at that point, the sar lazazel is also possible because it's haba atali, it's a package deal. Comes along Chanana Mitzri and he says, no. All I have to do is bring another Sire to replace this Sire Pnimi, And the Sarlaz also remains fine. And now it's Misdavig, it now marries, so to speak, it pairs up with a partnership with the new replacement Sawyer Hapnimi. Why not apply the principle of Dichui? Apparently, Chanana Mitzri rejects Dichui. So even though at the point to which he spilled the dam of the Sawyer Pnimi, we would docha the Sawyer Hachitzoni, the Sawyer Mishtalech. Nevertheless, it's not docha. Rav Ashi Omar, I'm going to tell you that even the Chachama who reject Chanana Mitzri, they have halacha biyado. Kol shebiyado lo havi dichui. If you can reverse the situation with your hands, then we don't apply the principle of dichui. It's not considered a permanent invalidation because you could remove it. And what's the case of biyad? So that's the case that we discussed about the berries on the hadas, that you could just simply remove the berries. So that's not dichui. And here too, in the case of these two menachos where you put the levona, it's not dichui because it's biyado. Just simply take off the levona, collect it off. Rav Ada wants to support Rav Ashi, and he says, "Kavasi Rav Ashi mistaber." It's logical. Why? Demand the shamet leili islay dechuyim. Who is the Tana who holds that there's a din of dichui? I'm going to prove that it's Rabbi Yehuda from the Mishnah in Yoma. The Od Rabbi Yehuda nishpachat dam. If you have the chatos and the blood of the chatos spilled, so we're talking chatos meaning the Sora Pnimi, is Yomis HaMishtalech. Forget about the Mishtalech, it's gone. That's called Dichui. Against Chanana Mitzri. Yishof Chadam. Ve'ilu hecha de biyado. I'm going to prove to you that Rabbi Yehuda holds that in the case of biyado, then we don't apply Dichui, even though Rabbi Yehuda advocates Dichui. Kos midam hatarovis. Oh, now we're on Erev Pesach. Erev Pesach is a bloody mess. What do I mean? Everybody's bringing their korban Pesach. The Kohanim are running around like crazy nuts, doing the avoda and the shechita of all the korbanos Pesach. And it's almost inevitable that some of the blood from one particular korban Pesach spills on the ground. And now you want to collect it and do the zrika on the mizbeach, but it's all mixed up with other dam, and we don't know how to identify the dam of this particular owner of the korban. Says Rabbi Yehuda, Kos hayavimali midam ataroves, the zarko zrika achas keneged yisod. He scoops up a kos, a kli full of dam, and he can assume that the dam of that person who didn't have a zrika and his dam spilled on the ground on the floor of the Azar before they did zrika is mixed up together with all this other dam that he scoops up from the ground. And therefore, when he zorek the dam, he now will be machshir the korban that 5 minutes ago was possible because it didn't have dam. So you see that if there's biyado, there's some salvageable way of setting the situation. And that's what we're going to apply in the case of the Levona, that the Levona could be collected and taken off. Amar Rabbi Yisrael Yosem Rabbi Yochanan Nosan Mashahu Shemen Al Gabi Kizayis Mincha. So we're talking about a Minchas Chote. And he poured on Shemen. And therefore he passes the korban, but only, says Rabbi Yitzchak, if there was a not only, but even, we'll get to Levona, so I jumped the gun. But in Shemen, even if there's a Mashahu of Shemen, Posal, my time of the Torah says Al Yasim, and that's a special ribui to expand the psul of the korban Minchas Chote, even if only a drop of Shemen was placed on what? On top of the fine flour is Sima Koldu. Oh, now the pasuk says Oleha. So now we're not talking about the shemen, we're talking about the mincha itself. How much mincha was there when that drop of shemen fell on it? Adi ika shiura. So Oleha tells you that it's got to be a shear, which I assume is a kazayas. Oh, but now Omer Rabbi Yitzchak, now he has a second statement of Omer Rabbi Yochanan. Nosan kizayis levona al gabi mashu mincha pasal. We just finished saying that in the case of shemen, the shemen has to be on top of a kizayis worth of the mincha. Meaning, let's say this is the mincha, right? Here and here. So if the shemen fell here, it was just a minor drop of shemen, but it fell on this part of the mincha. This got to be a kazayis in this part of the mincha, but not so in the case of Levona. Says Rabbi Yitzchak, in the case of Levona, even if he puts a kazayis worth of Levona onto a very small section of the fine flour, which is a mashahu, that enough. That itself is enough to passel the mincha. Not like what we said with the drush of Oleha, Adi Ikashir, you need a full kizayis in the case of Shemen, but in the case of Levona, you don't need anything more than a mashahu, my timer. And now we're going to apply a principle called ein miut achar miut el rabos. Lo yitain ksiv, Adi Ikanesina. But Oleha, and here we turn to Daf Samach, around number, Havi ribuy achar ribuy v'ein ribuy achar ribuy lem el lemayid. So we have another ribuy of Oleha. So it says Oleha twice, and if it says Oleha twice, then it's coming to be marba, meaning to expand the application of the lav, and in this case of the psul. And to expand it means that even if that kizayis levona fell on top of a mashahu of the mincha, that's enough to pass. Again, we're not denying that he could skim off the top of levona and then be machshered. But let's say he can't do that, like in the case of shchuka, or he didn't do so, then it passes the korban. So it's very interesting that now we have a chumrah in levona that we don't have in shemen. Because in the case of shemen, it only passes the mincha if it falls on a kizayis worth of the mincha, that drop of shemen. Yeah, but on the other hand, you have a chumrah that it's even a mashu of shemen. In the case of levona, we're going to be making, we're going to say it doesn't passel the mincha unless it was a kizayis worth of levona, not like the mashu of shemen. But on the other hand, we're going to be machmir because of ein ribuy achar ribuy el lemayit, to tell you that you're not going to passel the korban mincha with a levona, meaning even a kizayis levona, unless it fell on a kizayis of mincha. Just 1 second. Did I get that right? I'm sorry. Nosan kizayis levona gabi mashu. Right. Again, in the case of the paradox is that in the case of shemen, there's a kula, right? Because the shemen only passes the mincha if that drop fell on a kizayis worth of the mincha. Here we're going to find a chumrah dafka, paradoxically, in the case of levona, that even if the levona fell onto a mashu of the mincha, we're going to apply the principle of miut achar miut. I'm sorry, ribuy achar ribuy lemayit, to say that you're going to passel the korban even if it only fell on a mashahu.